back with another video, and today's video is going to be about defending with a back three and some key principles when you are using a back three or back five, three center backs moving through the thirds of the field. So before we start, please like and subscribe to the channel. You guys have been awesome about that, and I really appreciate it. So let's get right into the video because there's a lot to talk about. So I might even break it up into two videos, but so on blue we have a variation of a team building from the back with two forwards, because a lot of teams switch to a back three against two forwards, so they maintain that one-man advantage, so they're not 1v1 in their last line of defense. So common characteristic, and the team in possession can be a variation of a 4-4-2, as I'm just highlighting the shape here. So with narrow wide midfielders in the half space, so they have players in advanced areas, and with two center strikers, that would typically be pinning a back four, as it is more common that teams use a back four, but we'll see how a back five will deal with it and maintain the superiority, or if the back five switches to a or if the defense switches to a one-striker system, how that'll affect the movement defensively. Alright, so I've just highlighted the positions of the players and from the 4-4-2, and then we see the defense in a 5-2-3 or a 3-4-3, depends on the height of the wingbacks, and but pretty much it'll be a 5-2-3, and this formation has also become much more common in recent games. So I'm going to highlight it based on horizontal lines, so we'll count the wingbacks as part of the defensive line. We have our two holding midfielders, and because of the double pivot and the back three playing out from the back, the double pivot, we have an asymmetric staggering of our holding midfielders, just so the forward can be responsible for his cover shadow blocking one pivot, and a jumping midfielder can block the other or set a pressing trap. So right after I finish highlighting the team, we can start. So we just want to clearly show the shape of the players, as it can just help moving forward. And so now the key areas from the high block we can highlight. As we see, one wide center back is on one forward, one wide center back is on the other, so we maintain a +1 superiority. And then now the wing backs have more freedom to go on and press, so they could even be higher up the field, because the space that's vacated by the wing backs when they jump is a relatively low space of low danger, which is in the wide corridor out towards the wide corridor outside the width of the back three, in behind the wing backs. So that's not a very dangerous space. Obviously we don't want the team to get control, but from the first third of the team's build-up, it would be very hard to directly play into these areas with control. So with the wing backs jumping, now we have to sort out dual roles moving up the field. So in this back three, the center backs are pinned, but we still have a cover player, so if the ball is played direct, we always have a cover player in behind and have support. So now, the biggest difference, we can talk about the front three pressing and the two holding midfielders in a different video, in dual roles and how to compensate for numerical inferiority if you are without the ball. But let's focus on the back 3/5 for right now, because we're going to go through the other thirds of the field and see how it changes. So within the high block, when compactness is hard to come by or impossible because of the offsides rule, depends on how you look at compactness. You have less spatial control, so vertical mobility can become very important. So if you are playing with one against one forward with wide wingers, let's have wide wingers. So your defensive line probably wouldn't be that deep, because you want to hold a higher line when pressing, so you don't leave many gaps between the lines, or any more gaps than you normally would. So now the wingbacks can be pinned, and I'll show some few shifting dynamics so the wingbacks aren't always pinned. So now we have a 4-3-3, and we could do a single pivot now. So now the biggest change from this is the mobility of the wide center backs. And this is the vertical mobility because now they're not pinned, and now the most central defender, who typically doesn't have much vertical mobility because he's primarily a cover player, but if he is occupied by the center striker, or if the center striker is to one side, the free wide center back who is not being affected by an opposing defender, he has now the freedom to jump forward as long as he has cover. So he has more vertical mobility to jump into the midfield to control the space in behind. And this is more so true as we move back towards our defensive third, because now with all the space and lack of compactness to jump, it has to be a certain movement, and he cannot concede more dangerous space in behind with a broken structure. So if the ball were played here, we were to shift over, the player wouldn't really have to jump because our shifting dynamics would cover it. But if it was a fast circulation and our shifting dynamics didn't cover it, our holding midfielder couldn't get there, maybe the forward is on the weak side, so not pinning the defender back, then he may be able to jump. Just it has to be careful that this player cannot access this space. So in the high block, pretty much it's dangerous to jump as a wide center back, but it is possible, and especially with a false nine, the wide center backs can jump forward to try and decrease the control the opposing team has with the ball in the half spaces in advanced areas. So now, as we're going through some shifting dynamics, so to free up the wing backs in a back five can be a bit easier too. So if we shift across, we can get there, and now say the player comes weaker and the wing back sees that the winger is pressing ahead of him, then he can also jump. And now what we can do, if it's a drilled, or if the team's goals defensively align with this movement, we may even be able to go and defend into a makeshift back four using numerical equality. So as we see here, or it doesn't have to be numerical equality, but just the biggest thing would be the wide center back would now play as almost a fullback because of the jumping wing back. So now, here, I'll move the forward into a more realistic position. So now we see here's the back four, or the back five, I should say. I'll use this tool just to show the difference now in shape. So now it's a bit staggered and not perfect, but just want to show the concept of how a fluid back five can control the space as a back four, and wide center backs can actually move into a fullback position if the wing back has to jump. So let's move now into the mid block, and let's remember that in the mid block there's the most variation, or the most potential for variation in compactness, because you're effectively controlling two flexible lines. So that's the offsides line that you're controlling, and that's the line of depth that the offense is using in their offensive organization phase to then try and manipulate your lines. So I'm just going to set them up in a basic shape first, and then we'll get right into it. So I'm just moving the pieces, and we can even go to a 5-2-3 or a 5-4-1. Both are coming into favor, as I said earlier, and because it's a good way to control the center. And if we look at how Diego Simeone, he divides his training fields, he likes to go one more division down the center of the field, and this just allows the team to split which side the ball is on, so they can always get a good sense of their occupation of the center. So now the center 4 corridors, and just lines up very well with a positional play offense, so now the team can do better defensively. So now just moving the opponents to a basic 4-3-3 in midfield. And we're going to play against wide wingers and narrow fullbacks. And I am just going to move the defending with the back 3. I'll probably save the low block for a different video, because honestly that's when the most variation happens with the movement of the back 5 and how they become flexible, because controlling the space between the lines is the most important, and controlling the space in behind is also the most important because of the high danger. But you have your goalie and there's less space in behind, so oftentimes the focus then becomes the space between the lines, but obviously the space in behind near closest to the goal is the most important because that's where you score from. But okay, so we have our 5-2-3, and again when we shift over now, especially when the center striker is on the opposite side and not pinning the strong side outside center back, now he has more license to jump, especially with cover with these players, and probably only doing so if there's pressure on the ball, because if there's no pressure on the ball, player jumps too early, then that's just a lot of space to be exploited from a direct pass, which isn't ideal. It puts a lot of stress on your defenders in 1v1 situations. So from here we now have more flexibility, and in a back 5 it can often be hard with vertical mobility, because with strikers making runs in behind, tracking runs, it leaves more potential for the line to be broken or compromised with players dropping and players jumping depending on the spaces. And especially in a 5-2-3, the half spaces can be pretty well controlled in the wide areas, and players can press with dual roles pretty effectively, as I've seen in the past few weeks. Obviously there's some room for improvement in the wide areas. Seems to be less access, and with less players in each line, in the midfield line and the forward line, they have a tougher time controlling the wide areas, but that's when the wing backs come in. So depending on who it is, the qualities of the players can make the biggest difference. So just wanted to go through a few keys, show a few formations with a back 5, and talk about jumping and vertical mobility and some rotations, because that will be the biggest difference when going from a 4 to a 5, and talking about numerical superiority when it happens. I just want to introduce these concepts, and we'll continue this video either tomorrow or some other time, just talk about the low block and some more about the mid block. But just want to produce some content, provide some value if I can to everybody, and thank you so much again for subscribing. See you in the next one.